Hello, I'm Leo Di Donato. I'm one of the maintainers of Falco. And please, joining me in welcoming Lucas Roesler, a senior software engineer at Contiamo and also a core contributor of OpenFast. He will share with us valuable insights and all his knowledge in how to contribute to open source projects. So enjoy.
Cool. Thanks for joining me right before lunch. So primarily what I want to talk about, my inspiration here today is that I think we all hate waiting. And I find that this is, 28 days, I had a pull request open, no one likes doing this. And a lot of times I find in open source is the communication is kind of hard. And what can and what have we done to make the waiting less? How do we do this more quickly? And I actually find that the tools that we have in the cloud native world have actually made this better and now are getting better. So specifically, I want to share with you some of the things that I've learned, both on the contribution side. So when I came to OpenFast, I was looking for a project to help me do something at work. And I said, oh, this is great, it solves my problem. And then, but I wish it could do something else, or I need to do, I need to add to this project somehow. And then eventually I started adding so often, then I became a maintainer, core contributor. And so then I saw the other side of what this is like when you're receiving contributions. And finally, I want to talk to you about what some of the technologies and changes that are coming in the broader community that I think are helping us make this easier and faster. So first off, I'll start with the contribution side. I've basically two overarching things is communicate with the team. So especially in this day, that usually means get on Slack, say hi, introduce yourself. And the more you communicate with the team, and I think this is a pattern that we saw yesterday during the keynote, where they were talking about these young developers contributing to Kubernetes, and a lot of it starts with small contributions, talking with, just interacting with the team. And the more you interact, the more they know you, the more they trust you, the faster things are going to be. And then, of course, the more approachable your changes are, that's always going to make it easier as well. Because if it's easy for me to understand, it's easy for you to communicate what's going on, then, of course, that also helps. So some of these lessons are actually hard learned. I've done my own mistakes. So primarily what I'm going to try to focus on is where I've made a mistake and kind of what I've learned from that mistake to avoid it. And making small changes is really hard as a developer sometimes. You get in the flow and you're just like, oh, I'll change this, I change that, I need that. And all of a sudden you have this really big diff. And someone looks at it and goes, this is all great, but you said you were changing like this one line. And one line changes are usually the fastest thing to get merged. So the smaller your diff is, the better. And this particular example, I think what it was is I had Prettier installed, and I was modifying some JavaScript. And Prettier said, I'm going to make your JavaScript look a little, as the name says, prettier. Everything got rearranged for a one-line change. And of course, I mean, it looks nice for the JavaScript community. It kind of fits these standards. But when someone's going in to look at this and they're like, but we just needed this one bug fixed. I didn't want a 1,000-line change. That obviously slows things down. So what I found, I finally have learned to love git add-p. I'm generally a command line person, but my recommendation is git add-p. This is what's like git add, I think P is for pick, where you can actually go in and say, I want this one little piece of the change added to my commit. I don't want the whole file. I want just this one line change added. And honestly, I love the command line, but I find myself actually using the GitHub's GUI tool for this. Because you can just go in and say, that's the line, add it, and then it's very, very simple. I go back to it quite frequently, actually, because if you're using git add-p, this is what it looks like, which the first time I looked at this, someone showed it to me. It was like, hey, you should use this. I'm like, why would I want? What are all these options down at the bottom? Like, yes, no, quit, add, D for delete. What's slash supposed to mean? In the GUI, it's just add this thing. Double click to add the line, and you're good to go. So actually, depending on what it is, I've actually come to learn to love this to a degree, but I do find myself going back to that GUI every now and then. The other thing that I've learned is that context is king. So once you've decided, here's my one-line change, let's add it. Fix secret handling. So I actually went back to find one. This is not a great commit message. If I'm writing it as a developer, you want to just kind of like blast through stuff, and you write things down, and you want to share because you're excited. But when I receive it on the other side, so this kind of fits on both sides of the aisle as a contributor and a reviewer, it's a lot harder for me to be, well, what type of fix? And this is something I've been doing for a while, but you can actually force Git to remind you to add more context. So there's this .git message. If you add this to your home folder, Git will, when you say git commit, it will just copy whatever's in there into your commit message right away. So whenever I open up my commit, it just is pre-populated with this, and it just reminds me I need to add more than just fix something. I can add some bullet points there real quickly. And of course, you can put whatever you want. This is just what I have started doing. And so 99% of my commits usually look like this. I don't necessarily keep everything that's in that template. I don't always need a what section or a notes section. But I've actually been trying, as I was reviewing this, as talking with some people over the last couple months, actually, I realized that even this one's not so great. So we had a bug in OpenFast where you can say that there's a secret in Kubernetes that you want to be made available for your function. But some secrets in Kubernetes are Docker image, like registry credentials. And those weren't being set quite right. And that's what this thing fixed. And inspect the secret type and mount Docker config secrets as image pull secrets. This is probably not the thing if you're actually going back to the history. You're like, that you're going to look for. And so one of the things that I've been I decided to rewrite this commit message. Not in the project itself, but just for demonstration purposes. Support image pull secrets for functions. Like I highlight the why. The what isn't actually quite as important. Usually it's the why. I wanted to support pulling from private registries for functions. That's the thing that I'm going to go search for. When did we break and how did we fix image pull secrets? I go search or grep through my Git log for that. And you can still put the what in here, like the second bullet point. And you don't have to read the whole thing, but the emphasis is not so much on what you did, but the why or the benefit. And as a reviewer, when I see that pull request, it's much easier for me to say, oh, you're trying to fix image pull secrets. Did you consider, or maybe you missed this. It's easier to detect edge cases or think about the impact and review and see, did your change achieve that desired impact versus telling me what you did. Of course, your change, if you just tell me what you did, is going to match. So this is the other thing that I've been trying to do. It takes a little bit more time, but I also find it's much easier to open a pull request afterwards because almost all of the same content is asked for in the pull request anyway. And if I've managed to magically keep it to exactly one commit, GitHub will help pull that into my pull request body immediately. So I don't have to spend as much time, writing this a second time. And then finally, the other thing is, of course, writing tests. This is an easy thing to say, but this is the thing that I found the hardest when I started contributing in a project that's deeply connected to Kubernetes. And fortunately for us, we use Go. I went looking for this in the Python package for the Kubernetes client. It doesn't exist. I saw a ticket that it would be nice to have one in the Python package. I'm not sure about the other versions of the client, but I think so far, I don't think I've seen data scientists talk about Python and Java, but everyone else seems to talk a lot about Go. So if you're using Go, there's this really nice Kubernetes interface. And you should pass that around. Don't pass a client set around, because now you can actually write a test. So one of the things I did when I wanted to fix this was I wanted to really fix it. I wanted to see how this would behave and do a small integration test. But I also didn't want to spin up a Kubernetes cluster in order to do this. Until recently, this wasn't very easy to do, and I did this maybe a year and a half ago. So back then, I was like, I don't know if I want to do that so much. But instead of passing in the client set for Kube, I pass in this interface. And then what this means is on a unit test, or in an integration test, you can do something that looks like this. You have a test client package, and you have a new simple client set, and it just mocks in memory the entire Kubernetes API for you. It's not going to do everything that a Kubernetes API does. It's not going to do maybe quite all the validations or like the life cycle. It's not replicating the whole server in memory. But it's going to get you at least some of that integration. Did my method push a secret or get a secret from the Kubernetes API? And then I can check that. So I create my secret handler with my new mock kube. I call my secret handler and then ask the mock Kubernetes, does that secret exist? And I actually test against it. In much the same way, if you've written or deal with mocks, it just behaves the way you'd want the mock to do it. And it's one import, you don't have to change anything. And in fact, if I go back, this code here, if I said kube was the actual Kubernetes client set, this line would still look 100% the same. So it's just a complete drop-in. So if you do that, it makes it easier to write your test. So here, you can actually see what this ends up outputting in our actual test, and it takes not even a tenth of a second to figure out at least the basic interactions with Kubernetes. Is this going to work? So of course, anything that comes in with a test, if you're contributing OpenFast, I might consider flying out and giving you a hug. And if you're not a hug person, a thumbs up on your pull request, because everything with tests always feel better. So. Some very specific things that I've learned while contributing on the maintainer side. So those are kind of both, as a contributor, things that I've done contributing that I noticed made it easier on my fellow contributors and maintainers. But specific things I think the project and the community are doing, we are actually making maintaining easier and making contributing easier as well. And most importantly, I think this is around setting up a dev environment. This is getting so much simpler than it used to be. And of course, once you can set up a dev environment very quickly, you can also set up a testing environment very quickly. And of course, once you can do these things, you should probably tell people how to do this, and even better, how to automate it. If on the maintainer side, it's our responsibility to tell you, we want you to make some contributions. We want you to test your contributions. The more we tell you, the more easy we make that for you. Of course, it's going to be faster for everyone. So for me, I work on a Mac. And for a long time, it was Docker for Mac or Docker for Windows. It just had Kubernetes baked in. And this was great. It's actually really, really great experience because it just, you build an image, deploy an image. Things just kind of work really, really nicely. But it's not as say portable to tell my friends or other contributors that are on Linux, hey, by the way, just build the image and deploy it. It doesn't quite work the same. And so of course we have things like Kind, which is from one of the special interest groups. You have Minikube and MicroK8s. And I've really, really grown to love Kind in the past several months. A small mention that I didn't include on here was the K3S and K3D. I think are another really good ideas that when I get to the end, I'll mention them again. But for me, I think what we need to do to make it easier and faster for people to actually contribute when you're living inside Kubernetes is telling people how to test. And I've done this one, which is I just tested it by hand in a cluster doing some stuff. It's like, yeah, I tested it, and probably because I'm a core contributor, someone said, yeah, he probably did that. That works, okay. But if it's your first or second commit, then we're probably gonna be like, well, what do you mean tested? What type of cluster? What sort of environment was it in? What sort of operators did you have installed? There's lots of questions. There's so many things to plug and extend Kubernetes these days, which is a great thing. But it also means that there's more moving parts to test, to account for. So this isn't very easy to validate. What I've been doing recently, this is a pull request I had, is using Kind, I can actually completely script, set up a cluster, install OpenFast, and then give you instructions on how to modify that cluster to actually test the thing. I can then, especially since we had the fast CLI, it's really, really easy for us to say, here's a script for setting up a cluster, here's this Helm command for installing it, here's a fast CLI command to install my function, run this fast CLI command to test that the function's behaving correctly, and you just have step 1, step 2, step 3, and you can just plop it into any environment that has Docker. Well, Docker and Helm, and probably you might need kubectl. But if you're doing Kubernetes development, you might have these already. So this is something that using Kind has made so much easier for us to do manual testing. And even just local development. This is my go-to now just for whenever I need a Kubernetes cluster. I want to start with some clean local development. I don't want to muddy up some existing cluster. I don't want to deal with potential interactions to stuff. When I use Kind, I get a 35-line bash script that just starts it. So the slides are online. If you want to go see what this thing looks like, it's there. Or you could try and remember this SHA. But I actually want to show you what this experience looks like a little bit. So escape here, flip over. Now, I tried this morning, and so I decided to actually record the install using ASCII Cinema because it took 200 seconds on the Wi-Fi to do it. So I'm going to speed it up a little bit. So let's see. So I just run my script, and in about, since it's sped up, 15, 30 seconds, it just runs through all these steps, and we'll have a Kubernetes cluster with OpenFast already running. Now, I'm going to come back to this in just a moment because I want to highlight, move forward 1, 3 specific commands I think really made this easy. And so if you are also trying to do this, if you want to make your Kubernetes-based project easier to test and install, so of course you have the Kind create command. I like to give my environments actual names. You don't have to do this. It'll start one with a default name, but it's nice to name things. Next, kubectl, I don't know when they added this, but I discovered it and love it, is this rollout status command. It'll actually tell you when those pods hit the running state. So if you're saying, hey, start my Kubernetes cluster, install OpenFast, you're sitting there, you're waiting for it to finish. Like it takes a little bit of time. Maybe it has to download a Docker image and it has to start up. You don't want to start running some other command immediately afterwards. So this will just do exactly what you're waiting for. And then of course, and this is the thing that I really love about Kind, is this load command. So one of the big pains with, at least in the past, and why I loved Docker for Mac is I would build my Docker image, and it would just be available to my Kubernetes. I didn't have to push it anywhere. And Kind load allows me to completely mimic this on any system I come to. I'm going to say, load this image that's in my local Docker cache right away. So the combination of these are what make it actually work. So here we can see it runs a Helm install. I put a little timer there, 219 seconds earlier this morning. That's why I didn't want you to sit through that whole thing. And then I've done a little bit of helper here. Because it's a test environment, I set up a known standard user password because we enable basic auth. Since we have basic auth, it's better to start with secure by default and figure out how things break if I forget about this fact. And then I give myself a reminder of the command that I need to run. And then finally, the last step I do, Kind does not expose itself on my local network, so I have to do a port forward. And this means that now that pod, in our case, OpenFast, is actually available to be used. So because I ran this through the ASCII Cinema, it's not running, or not, well, it is running in the background because I left it in the background, but I need to do that port forward again. So let's see if it comes, yes. So here I have the port forward available, and if I wanted to open a browser, this is all a good sign. There's my OpenFast in dark mode because of a plugin I have installed. I don't think we support native dark mode yet. And I could easily just deploy any store function if I wanted, but that's not the thing I wanted to show you, because what I wanted to actually talk about is not so much I'm a function developer wanting to test out OpenFast. Of course, this could help you that way. But more of, I want to work on OpenFast itself. How do I run and test my stuff? So what I want to focus on instead is just briefly what that looks like. So I have my port forward. And just so we can double check what image I'm actually running right now. So here in my top right corner, I just asked Kubernetes to tell me what is my gateway running. It's running, we have two sidecars. We have a gateway, and then we have fastnetties. And that's the thing that I want to kind of develop locally. And it's running 075. So this is just the plain, if you use Helm to install OpenFast right now, that's the Docker image it's going to pull. So this, something I've been working on is a logs feature. So I have a logs branch locally. I also built that earlier. Where is it? So you can see last night, so 13 hours ago, I built a new OpenFast fastnetties. And also, so we can just check what the logs look like. The current version, not my latest, when it starts up, looks like this. So for demo purposes, I went in last night, added a little hello flag, so you can actually trust me that this really is loading my image. It's not just changing some values, and but it'll actually print out something new. If I tell kind to load my image into my cluster, takes a moment, and then I tell Helm to update to use my latest image again. And that will probably take just a moment to settle. But I can start asking Kubernetes for the logs again. So you see that there are two pods. This is actually a good sign. It's rolling out the new pod. And try one more. Oh. And there we go. My new pod started with my local development version. And all of these commands, the thing that I love about it, the thing I think speeds everything up, and the thing I think any project that is doing stuff on top of Kubernetes is that every single command I can just put in a script, I can just put in a GitHub pull request as instructions. What did I actually do to test it? Every single line verbatim can be put there, copied to, someone can look at it, copy, paste it, and run exactly those same instructions and say, yeah, this worked for me. So this is something I've been doing. I found it's actually helped me a lot as a maintainer. I'll get instructions from people, maybe without this sort of scripting. And what I'll do is I'll look at it and be like, okay, I know the system pretty well because I spent a lot of time in it. So I'll just kind of create this little script run through using this. And then I can say, hey, you didn't have instructions, but here's what I did to test it. So I can show them what I thought they did because they didn't tell me what the instructions were. But now there is some instructions. They go, yeah, that looks right. Or they can now verify the same thing that I did. And it's much easier to communicate something that's scripted like that than it is to just be like, well, did you do this to your Kubernetes cluster? Did you remember to install that? It's like, no, run this command, and we now have the same environment. So it brings a lot of the, I remember when I first learned about containers, it's like, oh, well, you run the same thing locally that you do in prod. It gives me some of that feeling back. And it's really easy. So I love easy, and ultimately I also love fast. So those things together is amazing. And it's not just for your local. Of course, you can do anything that you can script, you can do in continuous integration. And we had a community member contribute this, where they actually test our Helm install using kind. So any environment with Docker, we can just do this. And it uses exactly the same kind of sequence of commands. Create a cluster, add Helm, wait for everything to finish, add OpenFast, wait for that to finish, deploy a function. It actually goes through the whole life cycle and being very confident that now whenever someone adds a new commit to OpenFast, or the fastnetties, that everything works. That as far from a user's perspective, when they're deploying their functions, that function will deploy and we can invoke it, at least with our standard set of functions. So at the end of the day, automate everything. The closer you can get to scripting it, the better. And this is always going to make things faster. So the last thing that I want to kind of highlight is that living inside Kubernetes also makes it easier to automate things. And as we saw earlier today, where they talked about Slack bots, bots are everywhere. Bots are the best, apparently. And what I've seen kind of grow is more bots on GitHub. So one that we've built in-house is Derek, and Kubernetes also has one that they've built called Prow. And both of these help you manage and, in fact, enable the community to actually help you manage GitHub together. Instead of saying, OK, well, is this person somehow good enough or contributed enough to become somehow get special permissions in GitHub? You're going to say everyone can have permissions in GitHub to a degree. And using the bots allows us to have that fine-grained control. And in some cases, do automatic enforcements of things. So since we're open source, we want to make sure all the commits are signed off, that we have this, developer certificate of origin. So we want to make sure that that exists in order to make everything work, or at least on the legal side. And both of these bots are things that help, and both of these are things that would, I think, be harder without having Kubernetes around. Of course, there are other iterations and versions of these things on GitHub, but we love building bots. We love customizing the bots to make our workflows work better. So at the end, what I've learned between a number of kind of personal changes, making sure that I write tests, making sure that I write small commits, and reminding myself of doing this. At this point, with the automation that we've put in place, with the scripts that we can share for your local development, we really can get to the point where contribution really is just kind of a linear flow. Create a branch, build it, run it locally. And these are things we can actually say, yeah, just build and run it locally. Here's how you do it. And the easier we make that, the faster things go. So now, of course, this is the moment I say there are plenty of things to do. We want to make this yet even faster. I mentioned briefly earlier the concept of K3S and K3D. And one of the things maybe there's other ways of doing this, but the idea that we could build a K3S cluster that you can just install that has OpenFast kind of there already to go out of the box is really enticing to me. I think that's something that if you're really interested in like automation or have some experience with that, I would love to hear. Because I think that 200 seconds, we could probably get it down to like 10 seconds. We could say, here is the Docker image that is K3S with OpenFast on it. It boots everything up. You use a command to load your dev image in, and you're done. You've done all of that. You've done the cluster setup. You've built your image. And since it's Go, building's pretty quick too. And you've done that whole cycle in under a minute. I think that's possible. And I think that's possible because of the emphasis that our community has put on building some of this tooling. So if you want to contribute, let me know. Talk to us on Slack. Try out OpenFast. We have a workshop that walks you through all of this. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes just communicating, saying hi, letting people know that you're interested is the first step. So feel free to ping me if you're on Slack. And thank you.
Questions? Someone? Alex.
Great talk, Lucas. How can people in the room apply this to their projects and work? What are the key things they can take away and use?
I think, especially towards the end, the discussion around kind is something I think any project that uses Kubernetes can really take and reuse. Whether you're actually, in our case, we interact with the Kubernetes API very directly, or if you just want to have an environment, maybe you have some microservices and you need, like it's easier on Kubernetes, or that's what you normally deploy on, you could use kind to mimic that for your dev environment too. So I think that, and of course, finding the Kubernetes interface inside the Go package, it makes the testing way easier. So those are the two, from a technical perspective, things that I think anyone doing anything with Kubernetes or interacting with Kubernetes could use.
Anyone else? Thank you, Lucas. Thank you very much.